Don't forget, this purpose of Vayikra, this book that we call Leviticus, is drawing near to a holy God. Yahweh is holy, and He created things to work and operate and function in a certain way. And when we live our life in the way that flows with the way that our Creator made it, there's blessing, there's life, and everything just flows. But if we live in opposition to the way that our Father wanted us to, the way that things were designed to be, we really can't expect a good road, can we? If you're trying to run opposite of the way you're supposed to, you're not going to have a good ride, all right? So here we're learning what it is to be a called out holy people. And it's not just for Aaron and his sons or the tribe of Levi. This is for the people of Israel. Because we also see that, the Kohanim and the Leviim were supposed to learn to discern the things that were clean, unclean, holy, and common, and they were to teach these things to the children of Israel. Why would the children of Israel need to know if it wasn't for them? Okay, so Israel needed to learn just as much what was clean, unclean, holy, and common as what the Leviim and the Kohanim needed to learn. So today, it seems like we've lost that sense of the Father in our midst. It's like we say, well, don't you know you are a temple for a holy God, for the Holy Spirit, and He lives in you, and I agree with that. But it seems that we've cheapened His holiness. Because we look at that, okay, because He lives in me, then why would we feel the need or the call to live higher than ourselves? See, we see and relate Yahweh to that which is in us, which is great and amazing, but we don't realize that. See, we need to see Him as our Creator who created everything, who wants to bring us into His presence. He is holy. And so He's telling us how to dwell with Him and dwell in unity with Him. Can we truly say that I'm 100% completely satisfied with the relationship I have with my Yahweh, with my Creator, with my God? And if you could say, well, it seems like there's more I could do, it's just that depth of relationship, and guess what, guys? That's that stepping up. That's that as we grow, the Father calls us deeper. But as you grow, there's more responsibility in life. Even in the natural life. A 2-year-old doesn't have the same responsibilities as a 20-year-old who doesn't have the same responsibilities as a 40-year-old. Okay? So we have responsibility to walk in the holy things. So we need to learn what it means to be holy. Thus, Vayikra. It's the Father drawing us near to Him because we don't make ourselves holy. He makes us holy. But He desires for us to be drawn into His presence. How do we do that? So He says, I've made you clean, I've made you holy, and then He says, live that way. In other words, He wants us to live in a way that we were created to live. Don't you want to fulfill your purpose? Well, we need to live in the way that our Creator created us, if that makes sense, right? So here, we're talking about a time in the 8th day. Now, we spent the past couple of weeks talking about the offerings that were brought near. Literally, korban means something brought near. So the offerings that were brought near, and what the person's responsibility in bringing them was, and once they were brought, the Kohen and the Levites' responsibility once they were brought. And now we kind of switch. Okay, now we're looking at putting these things into place. Now, all this we've talked about is actually going to start happening. Now, you guys know, you start a project, you start planning, you start doing things, you start building things, right? So you're doing all of this, and this is great. You talk and you do and you plan and all, and it's awesome. But how many of you know when it comes time to actually start that project, it's different? Okay, they've built the Mishkan, they've built the tabernacle, they've talked about how the Levites were supposed to do these things, but now they're actually being put in place, and they're actually starting their job. They're actually starting their responsibilities, starting to step into the things that the Father says He desires for them to do. And that's going to change the dynamic of Israel. Okay? So, Shemini, the 8th day. Why the 8th? We're going to get into some of these things. Matter of fact, most of what we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to stick hanging around in the ninth chapter. Okay, like, I was really hoping to get to Nadab and Abihu and how they became Kentucky Fried, kind of thing, which you know how that goes. We're not going to stick on there tonight. Or chapter 11, where it talks about discernment and it talks about clean, unclean, these things in the food, the dietary, these things. We're not really going to talk so much about those tonight. Okay. We've addressed them in the past. We'll address them at another time in the future. We have some teachings available on those if you want to dig in a little deeper into those and find out, what Paul was really talking about when he said everything's okay if you just pray over it. What was the deal with Peter's, sheet that got lowered with the animals on it? What was that really about? All of these things. Okay, so we won't cover those things so much tonight. We're going to hang out in chapter 9 for a bit. All right. And primarily, really, in the first few verses. All right? Because we're kind of setting things up. So let's get into it. Shemini, on the 8th. Let's read verses 1 through 6, and we'll come back and break some stuff down. So on the 8th day, Moshe called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel, and he said to Aaron, "Take for yourself a bull calf for a sin offering, and a ram for a burnt offering, both without blemish, and offer them before Yahweh. And say to the people of Israel, take a male goat for a sin offering, and a calf and a lamb, both a year old without blemish, for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for peace offerings to sacrifice before Yahweh, and a grain offering mixed with oil. For today Yahweh will appear for you." If you're just kind of doing a casual reading of that, you're going to skip over the last part of verse 4. But that's the emphasis of this whole thing. It's funny how we miss the main part just because we get caught up in all the details that we forget the main point. The main point is Yahweh will appear to you. Yahweh will have a relationship with you. Yahweh is going to be here in your midst, and he wants to dwell with you. All right? So, verse 5. So they brought what Moshe commanded in front of the tent of meeting, and all the congregation drew near and stood before Yahweh. And Moshe said, "This is the thing that Yahweh commanded you to do." Why? Again, look towards the end of verse 6. Why? "That the glory of Yahweh may appear to you." See, verse 4 says, so Yahweh will appear to you. Now he says that the glory of Yahweh will appear to you. And guys, we talk about this. A lot of people talk about this. Do we want to see the glory of Yahweh in our midst? I hope so. But there's some things that has to happen before that can happen. Because if the glory of Yahweh shows up in our midst and we're unprepared, there's going to be problems. How many times do we see, and the glory, the cloud, and the glory filled and came down, and everybody was like, ah. A lot of times when the glory came down, people died. Because God is holy. We have to be prepared for the holy things. Okay? So let's look at this. On the 8th day, Moshe called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. So we're looking at the emphasis on the 8th day. Why 8th day? I mean, we even innately have this thing within ourselves. Here's just a little sidetrack. What is the mathematical symbol for infinity? It's a number 8. Turned on its side, but it's an 8. An 8th day is that. It's a symbol of eternity. It's a symbol of entering into something that has no end. We live in cycles of 7. 7 weeks. 6 days, 7 days. Shavuot. 7 weeks, then the next day, right? What else? Sukkot. 7 days and a day. And so then the 8th day, so there's a separation between the 7th day, then a day, the 8th day. Why the separation? An 8th is a new season. It is a new time. It is a new beginning. This is something that we must prepare for. And this is really the point that I want to drive home tonight. The Father is calling his people to prepare for the things that he desires for you. Think about this for a minute. We say we want everything that Yahweh desires for us, but are we truly prepared to make those sacrifices to step into what he's asking for us? We say, no, we want to live in the presence of God, but we don't want to give up anything in the world. Yeah, you can't serve two masters, right, Charles? You just said that. So we have to be able to step out of the things that keep us from this and see what the Father says. He says, I've made you holy, stay that way. He says, I've made you clean, stay that way. And that's our sanctification. That's where we live. That's a daily thing, right? All right? Before I give away all of my stuff, let's keep moving on. Leviticus 9, verse 1, let's look at that again. 8th day, he called. And why the 8th day? Because they'd just gone through a cycle of purification and dedication of how many days? 7 days. So the priesthood, they were giving a time of being taught what they had to do, and they were being set aside and purified and being dedicated for a certain period of time for 7 days. Then the 8th day, to continue their purification and dedication, they were now put into service. In other words, everything that they were working for in those 7 days is now going to be put into place. And there's a time and a preparation for everything the Father desires for us to do. Here's an example. 6 days you work. And then the 7th day you cease working. The 7th day is a Shabbat. It is a time of rest. So if you do not prepare on that 6th day for the 7th day, are you going to enjoy Shabbat? Absolutely not. Because you're going to have all these undone things caught up in your mind that you should have done, taken care of, and been finished by the 6th day. If you do not prepare in the 6 days for what is coming in the 7th, you will not be able to fulfill the desire of Yahweh in the 7th. And think about this for a minute. If we're not fulfilling and making preparations in the 6 days for the 7th, if we don't feel that's important, then if we can't enter into the 7th, how in the world are we going to get to the 8th? Oh. Now think about this. I know the different timelines and all the different things of the earth and the age of the earth. I'm not getting into all that. But in the traditional Jewish reckoning of time, we're in the 6,000 something years. What happens when we hit that 7,000 year? Entering in the 7,000th year. And then that's that millennium from the 7,000th to the 8,000th. And then after that, from the 8,000th to never ending. That's the idea. That's what we're hoping for. That's what we're looking at. But in order to enter into those things that are to come, we don't constantly look for the things that are to come. We're constantly looking at, Father, what do you desire for me to do today in preparation to make the way to prepare the things for what is coming? That's how we live. It's not about someday, somehow, some way, I'll get into the kingdom. Yeshua said the kingdom is at hand. Al yad, at hand. He said the kingdom is within you. He says you won't see the kingdom with your eyes. Does that mean that there's not a kingdom to see? No, that's not what he means. What he means is stop looking for someday, somehow, some way things are just going to get better when we get into the kingdom, when you can be living in kingdom life here now. And that's what he desires for us. We're making preparations here so that the Father can bring pieces and parts and show these things that he's desiring for us to enter into right here, right now, as a preparation for what's to come. Do you ever think about what if in the millennium it's not like automatically everybody knows Hebrew? What if you have to learn it? What if, just what if, when we enter into this millennium, we're not just floating on clouds playing harps. What if we have to actually go work a field somewhere? In resurrected bodies that won't age. Wow. Living the way that Yahweh gave Adam the earth to do. When God created Adam and he put him in Gan Eden, and he breathed life into him, breathed the Spirit into him. What did he tell him to do? Work. The curse was not, now he has to work the garden and work at the ground. The curse was now in hardship and pain and toil and all these things that's going to happen, and thorns and all this stuff. Not that he had to work. The work was given before the fall. See, so there's something that the Father's desiring for us there. All right? So, 8 is a new beginning, a new time, a new era. The priesthood had just set in place what the Father was about to reveal himself to the people. Because Yahweh is saying, I'm going to reveal myself to you, get ready and prepare yourself, and then he starts to put into place the things that are necessary for that to happen. Make sense? It's kind of like this. If Yahweh says, we're reading in His Word that I desire you to do this, is it all of a sudden now automatically next day that this is what you're doing? No, there's a process to get to anything. Okay? Don't be upset with the process. The process is made to refine you. The process is made to make you into what the Father's desiring for you to be. It's not like all of a sudden, you give your life to the Lord and all of a sudden everything's just great and peachy and perfect and never really any problems. Wrong. Matter of fact, I see just the opposite in the Scripture. Commit yourself to Yahweh and live a life of hardship, suffering, pain, and people talking about you and turning on you. Boy, that'll preach, won't it? That's the encouragement of the gospel. Give your life to Yahweh. Everyone will hate you for it, But what was the message to all the prophets? To all the prophets, He told them, I want you to go, I want you to speak to this people, but they're not going to listen. I want you to try to tell them to open their eyes and to see, but they're not going to open their eyes and not going to see. I want you to proclaim, but they're not going to hear. It would be easy for us to say, well, then why do I have to do anything at all? Because the Father is still desiring for us to prepare the way. Just because there are those that will not hear does not mean that the Father does not desire for us to live in His kingdom here now anyway. See? So, 7 days, they were consecrated, and there was a completion of a cycle. In the 8th day, they were now put in service. This is a new beginning, not 1, but 8. 8 is a continuation of what was established prior. If you're familiar with music or music theory, it's like an octave. Okay, there's 8 notes in a traditional scale, like just a major Western music major scale. There's 8 notes. The first note and the 8th note is the same note, but it's an octave higher. And then as the scale continues, it goes higher, and then it goes higher. Same thing. It's all the same notes. It's all the same things. Like the days of the week. There's 6 days in a week. There's really anything special about the first day this week than the first day next week. But yet, every week, as we work the 6th and enter in the 7th, it's like a cycle that the Father's building up within us. So it's not just going in a linear line, and it's not even really just going in a circle. It's more like a helix. As we're going through the cycles, He's elevating us and bringing us up into His presence, step by step. The 8th day. You have to go through the 7 days to get to the 8th. I mean, that's math. You don't go 1, 3, 8. Right? You have to go through the 7 days to get to the 8th. Right? So again, that's a process. You can't change the process. You can't speed it up. You can't slow it down. It is what it is. The Father has a process to bring us into His presence. He has a process that we live as a holy people. There's a process of how we're to do things in this life. You can't speed it up. You can't slow it down. We need to live in the process. And in living in that, we live in His kingdom here now. Okay? In the case we're talking about here, the priesthood is now inaugurated for service, and they're now stepping into what they were trained for. There was a training period. Can you imagine if you brought the offering, and the first person to bring that first offering, they bring it up there, and the guy goes, what do I do again? That wouldn't go well, would it? So here, keep in mind that all these things are happening. And remember what we said, the end of verse 4 and the end of verse 6, that the glory of Yahweh will appear to the people, that Yahweh will appear to the people. There is a preparation to see the glory of Yah. Are we willing to prepare our hearts to do so? Because He said He will reveal Himself to His people, but are we willing to make the preparations for Him to reveal Himself? It takes a process to produce fruit, does it not? It takes a process to produce fruit. If you don't plant something, you can't expect a harvest. That's pretty simple. But there is a process to this, right? So the process causes you to appreciate the fruit. You ever hear that if I just give you something, you don't appreciate it? I mean, here's a great example. How many of you were given your first car? I was given my first car. Do you really appreciate it? Until you got to start paying for it. Right? Like, you're going to have to use the car. You got to pay your insurance. Oh, okay. You got to buy your gas. Oh, okay. Here's a good one. You're a teenager. You got to buy your tires. So you best stop squealing them. Yeah, guilty, See, you don't appreciate what you have until you start paying prices for it. Until you start to understand the value of what goes into what you have been given. Let's not cheapen the grace of God by not valuing what He's giving us. Luke 6:39 says, He told him a parable. Can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone when he is what? Fully trained will be like his teacher. There's a time and a process of training, and to be a talmid, to be a disciple, there's a process. Because guys, disciple means student. Talmid means student. So are we being a student for what the Father is desiring for us? Or are we just kind of going through the motions? 1 Timothy 4:6. If you put these things before the brothers, you'll be a good servant of Yeshua, being trained in the words of faith. Being trained in what? The words of faith and good doctrine that you have followed. This is the word that was established. Having nothing to do with irreverent, silly myths, rather train yourself for godliness. How do you train yourself for godliness if you're not the one that makes you godly? So what's the training involved in godliness? Very simple. I must decrease so He will increase. I submit myself to Him. I learn, and I submit myself to be trained so that I can walk in what the Father's desiring for me. There's a training. There's a process to everything. Hebrews 5:12. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the basic principles of the oracles of God. You need milk, not solid food. For everyone who lives on milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness since he is a child. The solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment, what? Trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. Even discernment. There's a training involved. Leviticus 10:10. Yahweh is saying, you are to distinguish between the holy and the common, between the unclean and the clean, and you are to teach the people of Israel all the statutes that Yahweh has spoken to them by Moses. They were to learn clean, unclean, holy, common, so that they could teach the people of Israel clean, unclean, holy, common. Why? So that they would know it, so they would know how to walk, how not to walk, how to live, how to go about their life and the things that they would do. Hebrews 12:11. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. This is why it's important, like train your kids, train your children, discipline them, because they need to learn that discipline does not say, oh, someone's just being mean. You're just being mean because you're not giving me what I want. No, I care for you more than you know, therefore I'm not going to allow you to destroy yourself. Listen to me. There's a training in there, and the Father tells us the same thing. Because sometimes a lot of the things that we want is not good for us. And so the Father is teaching us and training us in discernment and clean, holy, common, so that these things that don't benefit us, we stay away from. Okay? So how's this? You will only appreciate something you've made an investment in. Like we've just said before, salvation is a gift, but sanctification is a daily process. Salvation is given freely to anybody who desires it. His desires none should perish. But yet, we live our lives a sanctified, holy life, a people set apart. That is a daily process for us. Okay? So we appreciate life in the kingdom when we allow ourselves to be a part of it. That's kind of a basic statement. You're like, well, duh. But guys, it's amazing we really miss this. We really miss the point of this. How can we say we're excited about the kingdom of Yahweh when we don't want to be around anybody else in the kingdom? Make sense? I mean, if we're talking kingdom and we're talking eternity, we might kind of start getting used to each other. Exodus 35:29. All the men and women of the people of Israel whose heart moved them to bring anything for the work that Yahweh commanded Moshe to be done brought it as a free will offering to Yahweh. When the Mishkan was being built, the need was put out. These are the things that we need to do so. And the people who were willing to do so, to make an investment in the Mishkan, to have Yahweh dwell in their midst, are the people who came. Matthew 16:24. Yeshua told his Talmidim, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. What does that mean? That means we don't serve ourselves, we serve him. And in serving him, that means there is a process where daily we might have to crucify certain things in our life, which means we got to learn what those things are. So we got to learn what sin is. We got to learn what clean and holy and common and unclean. We got to learn what these things are so that we know what keeps us from the presence of Yahweh. Because those things that are unclean keep us from his presence. Those things that are sin keeps us from his presence. If we want his glory to be revealed, we need to learn how he desires for us to live. 2 Peter 1:5-10. For this very reason, make every effort to supplement your faith. This means adding to your faith, and this is a daily thing. Virtue, add virtue. And virtue with knowledge. And knowledge with what? Self-control. And self-control with steadfastness. And steadfastness with godliness. And godliness with brotherly affection. And brotherly affection with love. For if these qualities are yours and are increasing, they keep you from being ineffective or unfruitful in the knowledge of our Lord Yeshua. Verse 9. For whoever lacks these qualities is so nearsighted that he is blind, having forgotten that he was cleansed from his former sins. Therefore, be all the more diligent to make your calling and election sure, for if you practice these qualities, you will never fail. These are things that we're told to do. These things don't happen just by, osmosis. They don't just happen, just we wake up one day and all of a sudden no. These are things that you make the effort to do and to live in your life. When he says to add brotherly affection daily to your walk, to add brotherly affection to your life, what happens when you and your brother aren't getting along? Now there's some things that have to change in that. And there's some things where you have to realize there's things that need to die and there's things that need to grow. So how do we know what those are? We have to make an effort to walk the way the Father is desiring for us. Now, in our own strength, you cannot do it perfectly. But that doesn't mean we don't live according to what he says. We walk as he says, and where we fall short, he'll meet us there. Okay? Scripture says that I desire that you don't sin, but if you do. See? That's what he's saying. That we walk according to his ways, and where we're weak or where we fall short or where we just don't know, he'll meet us there. But he loves you and you've heard this. He loves you to save you even while you were in your sin, but he doesn't want us to stay in our sin. He wants us to come out of that and to live a life that is giving glory and honor to him. So the 8th day of consecration, what was the purpose? Here's a good question. Was the inauguration of the priesthood supposed to usher in the presence of Yah? Or was the presence of Yah in their midst requiring a means for approach? See, it's more so the second, right? It's not a matter of, so if you do these things just right, then I'll be there. That really wasn't the point. The point was, I am coming to be in your midst, and because of this, these are the things I desire for you to do. Okay? Yahweh was coming to approach, therefore there was a need or a means to approach him. The priests were not diviners who summoned God to come to them. Okay? Yahweh says, I'm going to be there, prepare. And that's two different things. Ephesians 2:11. Therefore, remember that at one time you Gentiles in the flesh called uncircumcision by what is called circumcision, which is made in the flesh by hands. Remember, you were at that time separated from the Messiah. This is what we're talking about. We have a separation. So how do we come near? You were separated from the Messiah, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel, strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now in Messiah Yeshua, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Mashiach. So we were far off, but now we are brought near, and that's the whole idea of coming near and approaching. But now that we've been brought near in a process of covenant. But what covenant? To what people? And every covenant has blessings and cursings. Every covenant has things that we live by within that covenant. So if we're called to be a part of a people called Israel, a commonwealth of Israel, then maybe we should look at the covenants that Yahweh made with Israel. 1 Peter 1:13. Therefore, prepare your minds for action, and being sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Yeshua. As what? Obedient children. He doesn't just say children, he says obedient children. Do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance. But he who has called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. He says be holy in all your conduct, and just everything that you do. Not just be holy in these little pieces and parts. Be holy in all that you are. It's kind of like we think, Yahweh wants all of you. He wants you to be a holy people, except for this part. God, I give you everything except for this part. No. We surrender. And when you surrender, you do not negotiate the terms of your surrender. You surrender wholeheartedly. So what offerings were brought first? This is pretty cool. So for Aharon, he was to bring a bull for a sin offering, then a ram for a burnt offering. Aaron had to bring his offering first before offerings for the people had to happen. I'll get back to that in a second. For the people, they brought a goat for a sin offering, a calf and a lamb for burnt offerings, an ox and a ram for peace offerings, and a grain offering was given in there along with the offerings as well. So, in verse 6, why? What was the purpose of all this? What did it say again? That the glory of Yahweh may appear to you. So after all these offerings, the glory of Yahweh is to appear to the people. Now remember, it's not just now that you've done all these offerings, now I will appear. No, this is all of these things, I am going to appear for you. And these things is a preparation because the people were to understand what was happening and what was going on. They're making preparation for what the Father says He's going to do in our midst. Okay? So what were these things that were given? 1, verse 7. Moshe says to Aaron, go to the altar. In other words, he was to approach the altar and offer your sin offering. See, first Aaron had to go to the altar and deal with his sin. He had to go to the altar and deal with the things in his life first. His sin offering and his burnt offering. This is complete and total dedication to Yahweh. He first had to offer these things for himself. Then he had to make atonement. Well, how does he make atonement? This is providing a cover. This is providing an atonement. For who? For yourself and for the people. So Aaron was to provide an atonement for those in his care, for those under his authority. And if he was the high priest, who of Israel was under his authority? Everybody. Okay? Because he was a mediator for all Israel. All right? So provide for yourself, provide a covering for you and all those that are in your care. And offer the offering of the people. So then represent the nation and make atonement for them. Right? How? Just any way he wanted? No, as Yahweh commanded. All right? So the high priest had to be atoned for before he could provide atonement. Did you catch that? He had to deal with the sin in his life before he could make atonement for someone else. It's funny how quick we are to point out the problems in somebody else's life when we're not willing to look at the things in our own. See, Aaron didn't have that luxury. Aaron had to go and take a good look at himself and to provide for his sin and provide atonement for himself before he could intercede for anybody else. Okay? Why? Let's take a look at this. Leviticus 4:3. So if it is the anointed Kohen, interesting, Aaron was called the anointed Kohen, HaKohen HaMashiach. Every other high priest was called Kohen HaGadol, high priest. Aaron was the only one who was called anointed priest, HaKohen HaMashiach. So, if it is the anointed Kohen who sinned and thus brings guilt on the people, check it out. If Aaron sins, he doesn't just bring guilt on himself, he brings guilt on all those who are under his authority. Oh. So he had to provide atonement. He is to offer the bull without defect as a sin offering for the sin that he committed. Because if he sins, he defiles not just himself, but the nation. Okay? Now, this is a picture of the need for the high priest to be blameless. Think about that for a second. Our high priest had to be blameless. Why? 1 Peter 2:22. He committed no sin, nor was any deceit found on his lips. Yeshua did not sin. He did not sin. John says the same thing. 1 John 3:4 and 5. Everyone who keeps sinning is violating Torah. Indeed, sin is violation of Torah. You know that he appeared in order to take away sin, and there is no sin in him. So sin is violation of the Torah. Yeshua never once violated the Torah. Because if Yeshua had violated the Torah, he would have brought guilt not just on himself, but everything under his authority, which was all creation. Everything. We talk about the need, Adam was given authority over the earth. Well, the second Adam has authority over all things. If Yeshua would have sinned, it wouldn't have just brought guilt on himself, it would have brought guilt on everything that was created. And that would not have been good. See, so he needed to be blameless. He needed to be sinless. And this is the old picture of before you can help somebody else, you first have to realize your shortcomings. You can't intercede for somebody else if you're not willing to take a look in the things in our life. And again, that's just pride, right? Wasn't it told us to get the log out of our eye before we try to get the speck out of our brother's? Why were all these things evident? Again, that the glory of Yahweh may appear to you. So these things were made evident after these offerings. What were the offerings? There was the sin offering, hachatat, the burnt offering, ve'ha'olah, the grain offering, hamincha, and the peace offering, ve'ha'shalamim. So all these offerings were given, but there's a little something that's odd about this. Let's go. Hatat. The hatat was an offering that was given after repentance and after the acknowledgement of missing the mark. This was given for unintentional sin. This was after a recognition you had sinned. You laid hands on it, you killed the korban. The priest sprinkled the blood on the altar, and he carried the remains outside the camp, and he burned it. All that was burned and carried away was the portion for Yahweh. The priest could receive a portion to be eaten in the courtyard, and the one who brought it received nothing back. We covered these a little bit when we hit the beginning of Vayikra. We're just recovering here. Olah, the burnt offering, ascends to the Father completely, and he calls it a pleasing aroma. You don't get any of it back. It's given as a complete, selfless devotion to Yahweh. You just want to worship. You just want to offer dedication to Yahweh, all right? There's nothing I want to receive here. There's nothing I expect. I just want to worship. Then the mincha. The mincha was, again, a voluntary offering. Fine flour mixed with oil. It was unleavened. It was salted. You brought it to the priest. He takes the handful. He anoints it with frankincense and burns it on the altar. The priest gets the rest of it. You get none of it. And it was offered as a consecration of material possessions and gifts. And this was given with joy and with gladness. Okay? And then the shalomim offering is a voluntary offering. You laid hands on it and killed it. The priest burned all the fat and the innards, the hindquarter, and he sprinkled the blood on the altar. The priest received the breast and the shoulder, and you received back all that remained, and it was eaten inside the courtyard. This was a meal from the table of Yahweh. The peace offering is partaking of the table of God. Okay, these are amazing things. Thus, having peace with him. And this is where we get the whole idea of covenant meals, guys. And so this peace offering was sharing from the table of the Most High, and being at peace with him. It's a beautiful picture. But there's one missing. So what offering is missing from this group? Well, there was 2 sin offerings. Which one? The asham. The asham offering, also called the trespass offering. Okay? This was voluntary, or not voluntary, a compulsory offering. This had to be done, right? This was for cleansing or restoring a state of physical purity. You brought the animal, you confessed the sin, you killed it. The priest sprinkled the blood on the altar. All that was burned belonged to Yahweh. The priest received the remainder that wasn't burned. The giver received no portion back. The hatat was given for a show of forgiveness from transgression. The asham was given as a show the trespass had been cleansed. That the guilt, the trespass, the guilt had been cleansed. It did not cleanse. It showed that the cleansing was done. The guilt is gone. Okay? So look at this for a second. For the asham, we read back in Leviticus 5, when we read about the asham, verse 1, if a person who is a witness sworn to testify sins by refusing to tell what he has seen or heard about the matter, he must bear the consequences. If a person touches something unclean, whether the carcass of an unclean wild animal or domestic animal or a reptile, he is guilty, even though he may not be aware that he is unclean. If he touches some human uncleanness, no matter what the source of his uncleanness is, and he is unaware of it, then when he learns, he is guilty. Verse 4, if someone allows to slip from his mouth an oath to do evil or to do good and doesn't remember that he clearly spoke this oath, then, no matter what it was about, when he learns of it, he is guilty. A person guilty of any of these things is to confess in the manner that he sinned and bring the guilt offering to Adonai for the sin he committed. It is to be a female from the flock, either a lamb or the goat or the sin offering. The Kohen will make atonement in regard to his sin. So here, the guilt, Jeremiah 51:5. Israel and Yehuda are not left widowed of their God, Adonai Tzavaot, but the land is what? Full of guilt before the Holy One of Israel. So there's a need for guilt to be dealt with. Not just sin or iniquity, things like that, but also guilt, trespass, guilt. All right? Isaiah 53. Who's Isaiah 53 talking about? The suffering servant. We believe Yeshua, right? But look at something else he says here. I mean, we're well familiar with verse 5, right? But we're going to look a little bit past that. Verse 5, he was wounded because of our crimes, crushed because of our sins. The disciplining that made us whole fell on him. By his bruises or by his stripes or in fellowship with him, depending on how you read that, we are healed. We all like sheep went astray. We turned each one his own way. Look at this. Adonai laid on him the what? Guilt of us all. Though mistreated, he was submissive. He did not open his mouth. Like a lamb led to be slaughtered, like a sheep silent before its shearers, he did not open his mouth. Verse 8. After forcible arrest and sentencing, he was taken away, and none of his generation protested his being cut off from the land of the living for the crimes of my people who deserved the punishment themselves. He was given a grave among the wicked. In his death he was with a rich man. Although he had done no violence and had said nothing deceptive, verse 10, yet it pleased Adonai to crush him with illness, to see if, what? He would present himself as a guilt offering. See, we call this a sin offering that we read, this is a sin offering, because there were two sin offerings. The Asham was a guilt offering. And if he does, he will see his offspring, and he will prolong his days, and at his hand Adonai's desire will be accomplished. Matthew 6, 9 through 15, right? Pray this way, right? Well, down at the end of this, what does he say? If you do not forgive others their trespasses, this word trespass is also guilt. This would be related to the Asham. So he says, if you don't forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. So all of these things we see, yes, Yeshua dealt with this offering and dealt with this in our hearts and dealt with this in our lives, but why was this missing from this service when everything was being put in place? Because this was the inaugural act. This was the first instances of these things. There's not a need to restore what's just now been put into place. Make sense? This was just put into place. The Kohanim and the Levim were just finishing their days of consecration. They were just finishing their purification. They were just finishing the things that the Father desired. They were just now starting to put all this into place. They had yet to commit guilt against the altar. They had yet to commit guilt against the Mishkan. Here they are. Now, verse 10, we can talk a different story. But here they are in verse 9, chapter 9, that there's no point at this point to restore what's just now being put in place. Matter of fact, the act of the Mishkan being put in itself was an act of restoration, but this was being inaugurated here on earth, literally on earth as it is in heaven kind of a thing. So Leviticus 9:22. Aaron raised his hands toward the people, blessed them, and he came down from offering the sin offering, the burnt offering, and the peace offerings. So what was the blessing he spoke? I could speculate. What was the blessing he spoke? Look at this. Leviticus 9:22 through 24. So Aaron lifted up his hands toward the people, and he blessed them, and he came down offering the sin offering, the burnt offering, the peace offerings. Moshe and Aaron went into the tent of meeting, and when they came out, they blessed the people, and the glory of Yahweh appeared to the people. The glory of Yahweh appeared to the people after all these offerings were made, and then this blessing went forward. At the conclusion of this blessing, the glory of Yah appeared. And fire came out from before the Lord. And did what? Consumed the burnt offerings and the pieces of fat on the altar. When the people saw it, they shouted and fell on their faces. I bet they did. So here they are. They made these offerings. They blessed the people. The glory of Yahweh appeared just as the people were blessed according to what was given to Aaron and Moshe. And then fire came out and consumed the altar. The fire of Yahweh lit that altar. Think about that for a second. It says the fire came from before the Lord. The phrase before the Lord, we learn when the Mishkan was being built, the phrase before the Lord means in the holy place. So where's the fire from the holy place? The menorah. So fire came out from the holy place, went straight out through the doors of the Mishkan, and consumed, hit that altar, lit that altar, and consumed those offerings. Wow. And that's the fire where he says we're to keep burning, to keep lit. See, Yahweh lit that fire, but the people had to bring what was to be lit. Preparation. We do have a responsibility in the fire of Yahweh burning in our lives. We have to give him the things that he says he wants to light. So Aaron faced the people and his hands raised toward heaven. In the ancient Near East, raising hands before a superior human power, like a military conqueror, was a gesture of submission. Thus, raising them toward God or heaven could accompany humble petition through prayer. This was in the Zondervan Illustrated Bible Backgrounds Commentary. The idea of lifting hands was an act of submission or an act of surrender. Right? We even see some things like this today, don't we? What do the police tell you if they draw on you? Hands in the air. I surrender. Right? Lifting our hands is an act of surrender. And so when Aaron lifted his hands and he blessed the people, this was an act of their surrender to Yahweh, an act of surrender on behalf of all Israel. And then when the blessing came forward, some amazing, mighty, and supernatural things happened in their midst. 1 Timothy 2:8 says, "Therefore, it is my wish that when the men pray, no matter where, they should lift up hands that are holy. They should not become angry or get into arguments." When we gather together in prayer, are we fighting over what we're praying about? Or are we lifting up holy hands, coming in agreement? 1 Kings 8:22, Solomon stood before the altar of Adonai in the presence of the whole community of Israel, and he spread his hands toward heaven, and he prayed. And Yahweh heard. What could he have said? Possibly, Numbers chapter 6, verse 22 through 27. Adonai said to Moshe, "Speak to Aaron and his sons and tell them, this is how you are to bless the people of Israel, and you are to say to them." That seems pretty straightforward. You think? So you are to say to them, "Yivarechecha Yahweh v'yishmerecha. Ya'er Yahweh panav elecha v'chunecha. Yasa Yahweh panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom." This is the blessing that is to go forward to the people of Israel. And then he says this, verse 27, "In this way." In what way? Well, he just said, "In this way they are to put my name on the people of Israel so that I will bless them." So if they made these offerings, they made these preparations, they're doing what the Father put them in task to do, and then they go in, they make these, and they come out, they raise their hands, and they bless the people, and the glory of Yah shows up, and the fire of the Lord shows up, and the people are blessed, and they fall on their faces in worship, and some amazing things start to happen in their midst. What a picture. So can we do the same? Could we have that same effect in our lives? Can we have that holy fire in our life that burns within us, that when Yahweh says, "I want to bless my people, and this is how I will do it," that when we put ourselves on the altar, like Romans 12:1 and 2 says, to be of ourselves as a living sacrifice, when we put ourselves up there, are we willing to let that fire hit it, to burn, so that we can continue to bless the people of Yah and continue to live His kingdom here now, because that's what He desires. Amen? All right. Let's all stand.